Hi and welcome to Image Photography. In today's video we're going to be talking about exposure triangle. What the exposure triangle does in photography, it just simply controls light. And light, as we all know, in photography is quite important, that if you take light away, photography will just simply disappear. Not only you will be going through the theory of it all, but also I'll throw you into some of my work and explain to you how I did certain work and how did those pictures came out with the certain control settings. I started my photography about 3 years ago, and when I was going through my first camera, Sony a7R III, I was so overwhelmed by all the controls and the ISO and the shutter speed and aperture. I just didn't know where to start. So let me tell you that in today's video you will get an idea of what they actually do. So let's start with the ISO. Every single camera has got its own sensor. So with the controls on the camera you can make your sensor brighter or darker. So for instance, if you're in a very dark environment you'll bump up your ISO, but if you're in a very bright time of the day, on a bright environment, you bring your ISO down, which will make your picture a bit darker. The shutter speed, on the other hand, it controls the speed of your shutter, depending at what speed you've set your shutter. So this is the sensor and this is the shutter. When you press your shutter button, the shutter goes slower if it was set at the slower rate, or it will go faster if it was set at the higher rate. All of our lenses have got the blades, the diaphragm inside, just probably somewhere here. And a little hole where you can see a little light coming through is called aperture. So the smaller hole is, the less light coming through, the more sharper and darker picture we'll get. The bigger hole is, the more light will come out and more blurred out photos will come out as well. So for instance, for the portrait photographers, that's why they go for the lower f-stop lenses. For instance, I've got here 135 f1.8, and if I set this at f1.8 it will give me this beautiful effect of the creamy background, but then my subject will be all sharp and beautiful. But this is not good if I want to shoot a group picture. So for the group picture I will go to at least 5.6 f-stop. What you need to remember about this three, that there's a golden rule. If I, for instance, set my ISO at the highest, let's say 1000 ISO in a very dark environment, what will happen is it will make my picture very noisy and not great at all, because you'll see all these red dots and pink dots. What happens here that the camera has actually gone over its limit. So unless you're going for that look, then probably it's great, but if you're not, then you failed. With the shutter speed, if you set your shutter to at the lower rate, let's say the shutter has gone up and it's taken some time to go down, what happens here that the light's going through your sensor, it's getting a lot of information. So what will happen here, that most of the time you'll see not in focus pictures, smudginess, probably that your shutter is set at the low rate. In that case, what you'll need to do is you'll need to check your ISO and aperture to balance the whole thing out. However, if your shutter is set at the higher rate, then what will happen is that the shutter will go really quick, the less information went through, your picture becomes more sharper, but then it becomes more darker as well. With the apertures, as we spoke already, for example, if you're aiming going for the group shots, then I'll suggest you setting your f-stop to 5.6, so your aperture becomes really a bit smaller, less light coming through, and the pictures become sharp. However, if you're doing your portrait photography, then set your aperture, set your f-stop at the lowest, for instance like f1.8 on this lens here, so your picture becomes all this nice and creamy at the background and the subject very, very sharp. Every single photographer has got its own style, and to be able to master your style, you need to know all of these three, how to work with them. So without further ado, let's get through the pictures here. So what happens when you set your shutter speed at the lowest? For instance, as I told you, that the picture becomes smudgy and just not in focus. But if you want to achieve something like a long exposure picture, for instance in this shot here, what happens here that the person is literally standing at the center definitely use the tripod for this kind of work, because otherwise what will happen here, the person who you're focusing on mainly will be also smudging. And all these red dots and all these red lines going through, literally this is the laser. So I can see here the 3 people involved in this thing here. One is the subject, the other one is taking a picture with the tripod, and the other one is just playing with the laser. And literally that's what happens. This is the look if you are deciding to go for. You just need to set your shutter speed at the lowest, bump up your ISO a bit, and set your aperture at the lowest as well. So let's say at f1.2 if you're looking for something more smudgy and beautiful and creamy, or if you want everything to be intact and very sharp, then go to the f5.6. So for example, like in this picture here again, so as we can see, this is the long exposure picture. So what happens is here, that as you open your shutter goes very, very slow. As those cars approaching towards you and the lights are actually going through, the sensor will record every movement. And what happens here, you get all this really beautiful smudginess. And you can also do the videos like that as well. Looks really, really beautiful actually. But remember with this shot, you need to use the tripod. If you're not going to use the tripod, the whole thing, all these buildings, they will become smudgy because you will move your camera. And if your camera has inbuilt stabilizer, then it's fine, but still you see the smudginess. So yeah, definitely use the tripod. So for instance, in this picture, I've used the quicker shutter speed. The reason why, because I want to get a very dark background, and I used flash on the side here as well, which is the high speed sync option here, where it exposes the subject, because the light actually goes in there onto the subject, but the background is blacked out. So imagine, for example, you set your shutter, for example, like in this picture, I've used 1/4000th. So what happens here, the shutter goes really quick. So within this time, it doesn't have enough time to see what is at the back, because the light is literally not coming through enough. But however, the light goes onto the subject so much that it actually gets this light through. So that information goes through the sensor, but the rest is not going through. The next photo we're gonna go just to show you the example of the wider aperture. For instance, like here in this picture, I've used f-stop at 1.8. It was a beautiful bright day. And here, as you can see, the background is blurred out, but the subject which I was focusing on is in focus, and the picture looks just amazing. In this picture here, for instance, I've used f-stop at 5.6, so aperture gone a little bit narrower. The reason why, because I want everyone to be in focus. However, if I'd used f1.8 in this picture, then what would have happened, that the central of this group of people will be in focus, where the rest of them will start being blurred out. And this is not a great example of work if you're doing the, for example, like in this, whereas in photography, you want everyone to be in focus. Here is another example of the high-speed sync option of the photo shoot. Here, instead of doing my shutter at the higher rate, I made it a bit slower. I bumped up ISO, and I've left my aperture at f1.8 because I want to be a very nice and beautiful creamy background. But because I bumped up ISO, and did my shutter speed a bit slower. So what happens here, that the light is actually coming through the sensor, and then I've got the flash hitting on my subject, and it just gives this beautiful effect. So as you see, as I'm going through the pictures, you can see the examples of work which I did, for instance, and I used different techniques to control all of this free to get certain artistic photographs. For example, in this photo here, I've used my 24-70 lens at the f-stop of 2.8, and here, as you can see, the picture looks amazing and beautiful, and the front of the bottom of the picture is all blurred out because I've used the leaves of the tree to make this beautiful effect. However, if I've used f5.6, what would have happened in that case, then the whole photo would have been in sharp, and even those leaves will show as a leaf. Okay, so for instance, like here, with the 2470. The f-stop was set at f2.8, and the focal length of the photo, because 2470 it's a telephoto lens, so I've increased to 70, and then I've just pulled back a bit, so I'm getting more light coming through. And as you can see, the effect of the bokeh and the smudginess and the creaminess looks just amazing. So for example, like in this photo here, I've had the beautiful sunrise, and this is the photo shoot on the beach. What I was really careful about here, if I did increase my ISO, then the picture would become really grainy and not really nice. So I've kept the quality of the picture. But this picture looks amazing. But if you look at the next picture here, I've used a bit of the flash, so it gives a little bit of that beautiful effect. They both look amazing, but if I did increase the exposure a bit higher and the shutter speed a bit low, what would have happened, because the person was actually massaging the other person, and it would become just all smudgy. But also with the shutter speed here, I just want those lights, the sun showing its sun spells. So as you can see, it goes as it strikes. Looks really, really beautiful. This effect you get when you set your shutter speed a bit higher. So it gives this kind of like a little bit of focus in effect into the light. For example, like if you take a picture of the light, if you increase your shutter speed a bit higher, you can see the star effect, which looks like really, really amazing. So as you can see, mastering all these three is quite important. You get one wrong, then your picture is totally crippled. So it is really important to be able to find your own style. You need to know how to set your ISO, how to set your shutter speed, and at what rate to put your f-stop. I want to thank my followers who followed me just recently. I totally appreciate you following me, and I'm happy that you're getting a little bit of information to master your own style, master your photography. To anyone who is new at my channel, please subscribe and like, support my channel. There will be more videos coming through, and if you really want something which you really don't understand for me to shoot and do a tutorial for you, please leave the comment down below, and I will definitely get back to you with the new video. And as for now, thank you so much and take care. Speak to you soon.